Cool. All right. We're recording. Hello. This is Ed Gallo from the Fight Site and Bloody Elbow sometimes. This is the Wrestling for MMA podcast where I talk about both wrestling and MMA and how they intersect. I think it's a good way to sum it up. Yeah, it's previous episodes. I've done some conceptual things, some case studies, listener questions, and I've had a couple of guests. This is another guest episode, so everybody that submitted your questions yesterday, it's Saturday for me now, so yesterday I think it was. I'll get to your questions. We'll probably do that for next week unless I have another guest. But in any case, they will be gotten to, so I won't ask any more. I won't ask for any more questions until I've answered those. But thank you for your questions; they're very insightful. A little more focused than last time, so I appreciate it. I'm still figuring out the identity of the show since it's pretty new, so I appreciate you bearing with me as I try out some new things. But I think today's episode will be pretty on point and focused. So I have a guest here with me, and he'll introduce himself in a second. But yeah, this is like what I want. This is a professional mixed martial artist who has a wrestling background, and I've seen his fights, and he uses his wrestling well. And he's very analytically minded, so this should go well. But yeah, let's see if I'm going to butcher his name. That's something I should have done before we started. Check the pronunciation. I'm going to say Jared McLoughlin. Is that right?
That is beautiful. That's perfect.
Okay, I got it right. This is Jared, everybody, and he's a professional mixed martial artist, and I will just let him introduce himself to the people.
Well, Ed pretty much covered it. I'm a former wrestler and a professional martial artist, and I'm here to talk about some wrestling and MMA.
Mm-hmm. And, right off the bat, interesting stuff from Jared that I think you're from Oklahoma. That might be right, but you're currently living
Yes,
in New
sir.
Zealand. So that happened pretty recently. Is that how long you've been in New Zealand?
Yeah, I've been in New Zealand for about, let's see, it's April now. I've been here for 2 months since
Nice.
February.
Mm-hmm.
Came out here to really focus on the kickboxing aspect of the sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we'll backtrack. We'll get back to that because I don't want to lose focus. My brain processes things chronologically, so we're just gonna go in order. So let's just hop right to it. So Jared, tell me about when you started wrestling, how you got into wrestling, and just what your wrestling career looked like.
Yeah, I started wrestling in my sophomore year of high school, but I had already started jiu-jitsu and other martial arts prior. I started wrestling because I knew I was going to need it in MMA. I knew that was the goal. What are the other questions you asked?
Yeah. Oh, it's just how did your career progress from there? How did it go? Just what was it like from that point on as a wrestler?
I had an interesting high school wrestling career. I had some disciplinary issues that kept me out of ever
Mm.
getting to compete at state. 3 years in a row, Ed, I was a poor decision maker, and three different reasons I wasn't allowed to wrestle at state. So I don't have many folk style accolades. I wrestled 1 year of Greco-Roman and freestyle, and I qualified for Fargo, pretty big tournament for wrestling.
Nice.
I won a regional Greco tournament to qualify, but I knew that I wasn't at the level to compete with those guys at Fargo yet.
Mm-hmm.
It was just my third year of wrestling. Like I said, I was doing jujitsu prior. I just wrestled so that I could help my jujitsu and my MMA. So I never went and competed at a lot of these big tournaments, but I've been in the sport for a little bit now and feel like I have a pretty good knowledge of it.
That's interesting. So I started. I joined the wrestling team sophomore year of high school as well, but I didn't even win varsity matches, and you're out here qualifying for Fargo. So how did that happen? How'd you get so good so fast?
My first 2 years was a pretty rough time. I was just wrestling JV matches and getting smoked. Everybody was pinning me with a half Nelson. It was a trying time, but at the same time, I think what made it easier was just I never really felt like I was there to be the best wrestler. I was just there to learn as much as I could to benefit me in mixed martial arts. And so losing all the time never really bothered me because I knew I was just building tools and adding tools to what I already had and what I was already good at.
Mm-hmm.
And then my senior year came around and I was just putting in a lot of work, just practicing, constantly wrestling with guys. My practice partner too, he was a state champ. He wrestles in college currently, JD Johnson. So like I
Gotcha.
was always getting beat up. Baylor Smith wrestling in college as well. They're at Newman University. Like I was constantly getting beat up by good guys. Guys were constantly showing me stuff, and I might go work out in the morning with JD, do some wrestling, go to school. My final period was athletic, so I'm wrestling, real wrestling practice then. Then I'm going home and I'm going to a jiu-jitsu gym and I'm grappling some more. So
Hmm.
it was just constant time on the mat, time on the mat, time on the mat. And it really helped my skill level, my performance, but it was a huge detriment to my ears. They're swollen up and ugly.
That's okay. I don't know if pretty was the look you're going for in the first place. Because do you still currently do you rock a mullet right now?
I actually do. So I got rid of it for a little while.
Uh huh.
After my last fight, whenever I lost in the first round, I decided that until I could make sure that didn't happen, what business did I have worrying about my haircut? So
Hmm.
I went ahead and I cut the mullet off. But
Gotcha.
actually, just last night, my roommate got some scissors out, and we went ahead and cut my hair back into a mullet. So it is back now.
Gotcha. I mean, it's your life. Do what you want. I've never, I understand the appeal. I've never been a fan of mullets, but I get it's a cultural phenomenon. It's definitely a
Yeah,
look.
down south too, where I'm from, Oklahoma, there is a big resurgence of the mullet. During my high school years, people were pumped about it, so I went ahead and got one. And
That's
now
fair.
it's just almost like I made T-shirts for one of my fights,
Hmm.
and I put a silhouette of my head with the mullet in the middle, and so I almost feel like when I cut it, a lot of people were a bit upset. Like people like the mullet more than they like me, so I had
Hmm.
to bring it back.
Well, I'm not in that boat. So that's like one of my least favorite things about you already. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, you're reminding me of somebody right now with your plan, your life plan. A lot of people pick up wrestling to help with their MMA and jiu-jitsu aspirations and stuff like that. But like people who got pretty good at it for that reason. I think Lando Venata was in a similar boat where he like started wrestling for MMA and then like went D1 and was at UTC Chattanooga for a little bit. I don't know if he like really had a stint there, but just to make it D1 from not really taking the sport like as your main
Oh yeah,
focus is very
so
interesting.
impressive.
Yeah, that totally reminds me of that. So it sounds like you've been planning this career for a while. What age, what started your interest in combat sports and maybe being a pro fighter?
Man, it comes back to 2006 actually. I
Whoa.
was born in 1999, so I'm 7 years old at this time, and I never really cared about team sports or anything too much, but my dad was talking about this new sport, kind of newer sport, right? The UFC, and I didn't know what it was. Like I'm 7 years old, but my dad seemed excited about it, and he's going to a friend's house to watch some fights, and I'm begging him if I can come, and he finally, allows me to come and makes me promise not to blah blah blah, right, behave, all this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
we get there, and it's I don't know the name of this fight card. It was Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz in the main event, and the co-main event was Forrest Griffin versus Keith Jardine.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And Forrest Griffin got knocked out. It was not a good night for Forrest Griffin, but there's just something about watching the fights, and I just knew. I watched Chuck Liddell. I went home and I cut my hair in a mohawk like Chuck Liddell. There's a later point in my life where I had my hair dyed orange like Forrest Griffin. So after I saw those fights, I was just absolutely sold on the sport. And I didn't start any martial arts till maybe 6 or 7 years later when I was 13,
Mm-hmm.
14 and started jiu-jitsu. But I had decided in my head that I would be a world champion at that age.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So was it just jujitsu and wrestling through high school, or were you already training striking at that point?
I had done some striking, but the vast majority of my focus was on wrestling and jujitsu,
Mm-hmm.
just the grappling aspect of
Yeah.
stuff.
Build a
Kept
solid
my
base there.
parents, yeah, exactly, and stay a little bit away from brain damage until I'm a
Mm-hmm.
little more developed.
That's
Even though,
fair.
end of the day, you're gonna get in there and rattle your brain. So
Sure. And you're 20 now, right?
I am 20 now, correct? Oh,
Gotcha.
no. I just turned 21 five
Oh,
days ago.
congratulations. Does that mean anything in New
Thank you.
Zealand, or is that, just whatever?
Yeah, drinking age here is 18, so no one
Gotcha.
no one could care less. But
Whoops.
I'm not much of a drinker, so
That's
I
good. That's
wouldn't
a
too.
good thing.
Yeah.
Same here. So when was your first amateur fight?
My first amateur fight was, gosh, 2017, I believe, like September of 2017.
So basically, as
What?
soon as you could take a fight.
Yeah, basically, right. I turned 18 and it was like, look for a fight, look for a fight, look for a fight. And I really had no skills at this point except wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and I went into my first fight. And I just remember the fight starts and this kid throws a 1-2 at me, and it misses, but I feel the wind off of it. And I was like, oh, what the fuck am I doing? Just that moment where I was like, this is real. You know what I mean? It's not
Hmm.
training for a fight. It's not watching people on TV. At this point, it is like, this guy is going to try to, maim me until a referee can pull him off, and I'm supposed to do. So it was a very surreal moment, but you know, that fight or flight kicks in. I grabbed a hold of his legs, took him down, and just punched him till the ref pulled me off of him. I had a nice advantage on the ground versus all these guys. I was already a
Right.
purple belt at the time. I was
Oh
a
wow.
pretty decent high school wrestler, so it was like once I could get a hold of most of these guys, I would just take them down and beat them up.
Hmm. So
That's funny
that
though that
yeah.
you mentioned Lando Venata earlier. He was one of the guys that I got to do a lot of training with at Jackson Wink until the cowboy drama, and Lando Venata ended up he trains somewhere else now. He trains in Albuquerque still, but the gym's called Jackson's MMA.
Right.
It's got different coaches and everything, but yeah, he's a stud, man. Lando Venata, he's only like 28 now, I think.
Hmm.
I think he's still got a lot higher ceiling than people think. That fight, that debut fight versus Tony Ferguson,
Uh huh.
where he almost knocks him out. I don't know if you're familiar,
Oh,
but
for sure, for sure.
yeah, he's a stud, man. Training with him was a lot of fun.
Yeah. He's somebody that frustrates a lot of analysts because he shows a ton of good looks, but you can tell he has this idea in his head of what he wants the fight to look like, what he wants the style to be, and in a way, I respect it. That he has this philosophical conviction to
Yeah,
be
you
the way
see
he
him do
is.
these beautiful moves, and sometimes you're sitting there just begging him to raise his hands up to some form of a guard.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
He's
pretty
fun.
funny, but
He's
he,
fun
he
for sure.
does he does well enough with his style. Yeah,
Hmm.
always entertaining.
Cool. So I guess you trained locally for a while. When did you move for Albuquerque?
So I had my first amateur fight. Then I had my second amateur fight just maybe a month later on like 7 days notice. I was just hungry to fight, to fight, to fight.
Hmm.
And then I was scheduled for a third amateur fight. And then a matchmaker hit me up from the card. And they're like, hey, we've got a pro bout versus a 1-0 kid. The pay is, 750 to show and 750 to win. And I'm like 18 at the time and
Hmm.
barely ever made any money in my life. It's like 4 days out from the fight as well. And I'm like, fuck, man. Like I was about to do this for free, and now they're gonna pay me, almost $1,000 just to show up and fight.
Sure.
And so my undeveloped 18-year-old mind seized the opportunity, and I went out there and I got beat up by a guy named Matt Dixon.
Hmm.
And right now, Matt Dixon is one of the top 5 ranked welterweights in the nation. He's maybe 9-0 now. He's a stud, but he went out there and he beat me up. It was a TKO, and
Yikes.
after that, I was like, "Fuck, man! Like, if I'm gonna be fighting guys like this, I got to be training with guys like this." And my coach, my jiu-jitsu coach, took me out and set me up for a month at Jackson Wink. And after a month, I was like, I got to be here for another month. I did a second
Hmm.
month, and I got offered my second pro fight versus a guy named Brandon Wright. And after 2 months out there, I just went out there and just chained together some submission attempts and eventually put him away with a triangle in the second round.
Nice. Nice. I mean, so I want to ask questions about training at Jackson Wink. What's that like? But honestly, I feel like at that point in your development where you're just starting to be an MMA fighter and you've had 2 fights, I feel like what couldn't you gain from being at a gym with a bunch of pro fighters like that? So I just want to tell me about some of the things that right away made a big difference.
Just the quality of training partners. Like you go from a small gym right? Where there's a lot of hobbyists, and some people are there because, martial arts has just given them like a better lease on life, and they have
Mm-hmm.
improved confidence and things like that. And then you go to a gym like Jackson Wink, and everybody there is single-minded in the sense that everybody's going after the same thing. Everybody wants a career of this. Everybody wants a gold belt around their waist. Everybody wants tons of money. Everybody's after what you're after. They're trying to be a professional martial artist at the highest level. So immediately, just the level of intensity in the training is different. Even if you think you're working hard at like a small gym with, 45-year-old dads and stuff
Uh-huh.
like that who are, good training partners, but it's not the same as another, 25-year-old kid who's, hungry for opportunity and just wants to get in there and work.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately, just the level of training, the intensity of training, that combined with the elevation up there in Albuquerque, it made for a tough couple weeks adapting to it. But I mean, that's really the big difference. You can find good coaches anywhere, but the training partners that were at Jackson Wink is what made all the difference.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. Is like, did you notice any significant difference between what you were learning from the coaches? Maybe just more one-on-one time, maybe, but even maybe not even. I don't know. Like, what was that like? Compare and contrast.
Yeah, so coming from where I was, I definitely got a good bit of attention as I was one of the only guys who was, really trying to do this competitively. And at Jackson Wink, yeah, there were so many people that you do just kind of get lost in a sea of people unless you can sh- show enough to make yourself show enough to make them want to invest more time in you,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I definitely noticed that. Like you're not really going to get any attention up there until you earn it, and even then, it's not promised. So that
Right.
was a big difference.
Who did you work with that we might know of?
As far as coaches or training partners.
Both.
Okay. We'll start with coaches first. I was doing mitts with Frank Lester. You
Oh
might
yeah,
know
he
him.
was on the Ultimate
Greg.
Fighter. That's how I know him.
Yeah, yeah, Frank the Tank. Um, yeah, he had that fight on the Ultimate Fighter where all his teeth came out,
Uh
huh?
huh.
Yeah, he's a crazy guy. Greg Jackson teaching classes 3 days a week in the morning. Coach Wink teaching them the other days in the morning. Uh, they actually have a grappling coach out there who's one of the best coaches I've ever seen, and he doesn't really get enough credit. He's Cowboy Cerrone's jiu-jitsu coach as well, Harry St. Ledger.
Okay.
He's like a black belt out in jiu-jitsu from New York, former world team member for judo. Like the guy's a stud. Him and his twin brother were training partners for GSP for a while out at Danaher's gym.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the coaching side of things. Six Gun Gibson's out there as well teaching
Yeah.
classes, and then they've got for training partners. Man, the first guys I was really working with out there were Lando Venata, like we talked about. Um, Carlos Condit was one of the first guys I worked with, and Diego Sanchez was out there
Nice.
when I first got there, even though he has since left the gym. That would be
Yeah.
a fun one. We'll have to talk about that. I've actually done a one-on-one training session for an hour. It was one-on-one, one-on-two, I guess I should say. It was me, Diego Sanchez, and Josh Fabia, and I worked with them for a little over an hour. Yeah, so we can get into that at one point.
I can get into it now. I'm ready. Do tell.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it was. So I get a text one night from Diego Sanchez, and Diego texts me and he says, "Hey, Jared, you want to come in tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., do some work, some light movement?" And immediately, I'm a kid who grew up watching Forrest Griffin and Diego Sanchez on The Ultimate Fighter. I couldn't be more excited. He's inviting me to do some private training with him. I'm like
Mm-hmm.
18 years old at the time or 19. I'm like, absolutely, dude. I'll see you there. I'm thinking, here's my chance. I'm gonna get in with Coach Jackson, Coach Winklejohn, all these guys, right? They're gonna be here helping Diego, and I'm gonna do
Mm-hmm.
a good job. Blah blah blah. And I show up, and Diego's in the corner with some short. I don't know. Native American maybe looking man. This guy looks like this guy might have oil rubbed on him. I'm thinking like his skin looks a little shiny almost. There's some, and Diego's doing cartwheels and forward rolls and just some interesting stuff, right? That you don't see every day at a martial arts practice. Most guys are working on their jabs and their slips, but Diego seems to be investing more time into his chi and his energy and stuff, and teach their own. But we get down to it. We get in the cage, and Joshua starts teaching us some very interesting stuff. So Diego is preparing to fight Michael Chiesa at this point, who I see a guy on your YouTube who loves commenting about Michael Chiesa. That always cracks me up. Future mayor of Spokane, I believe. But so Diego's training for Michael Chiesa, and their game plan for this fight, what Josh wanted him to do, was every time that Chiesa blitzed linearly, right? Like Chiesa, when he punches, he likes like 1-2, 1-2, right? Like those James Vick type of straight line blitzes. And their game plan was to forward roll and allow their leg to extend, almost like a rolling thunder.
Oh my gosh.
Like the one he almost hit on Michel Pereira. So the plan was every time Chiesa comes in on a straight line, they're going to hit this move. But Ed, how the fuck do you practice that move in sparring without being, you know what I mean? Like that's a dangerous. And so they're like, okay, Jared, like come in on a straight line and Diego's going to do this rolling thunder. And I'm like, are you guys out of your fucking mind? Like I'm like taking one step forward and then like jumping back so I don't get hit with this absolutely fucking retarded strike that they're throwing. And so that was interesting in itself, right? And then Josh starts teaching us compound law. Are you aware of Sistema, the martial art?
Yeah, it's like BS, right?
I'm not gonna be the guy who decides, but a lot of critical thinkers have come to the conclusion that it is a no good martial art.
Gotcha.
Well, Josh's background is Sistema, and you can find, I think it's BJJ Scout, who's put up a nice video on YouTube breaking down like the origins of Joshua Fabia and where he learned his stuff. Well, anyways, Josh starts teaching us some Steven Seagal-esque Aikido style, like compound fractures of the wrist and the elbow off collar ties and stuff that John Wick might have hit in one of his 3 movies, but not stuff you see very often in the octagon. And we drill some of this stuff, and it's some finicky moves that no one's really ever going to hit, but whatever, it might have some basis in reality. and then we get over to the cage wall, and this one is my favorite one. Josh has Diego put his hands on the wall. He's facing the cage. He puts his hands on it. He closes his eyes. And now they have me reach out, and I'm either going to touch Diego's right shoulder, left shoulder, right hip, or left hip. And depending which side I touch, so if I touch Diego's right side, I'm behind Diego. Diego's hands are on the cage. I touch his right shoulder. Diego is going to spin to his right with a back fist, circle around to my back, and grab a rear naked choke, and then Josh would blow, and I'm just going to stand there. Exactly, just like a real competitor would, right? And then Josh would blow a whistle, and then Diego, he would roll out a Swiss ball, those big yoga balls, and then for 20 seconds, Diego would ground and pound the Swiss ball. And it's not stuff you've seen a lot of guys doing, but there's some fun stuff, man. It was like the compilation scenes out of Batman Begins. Like Diego's hanging upside down on the pull-up bar, and Josh is hitting him with a stick, and you don't know whether to call the police or mental health people or just to leave them doing their thing. Maybe it's real. Another fun one. I wasn't here for this one, but there's been videos of it. Was Josh blowing bubbles in the cage and then Diego punching the bubbles. That was probably my favorite one.
That's brilliant, in fact.
I guess that was for hand-eye or maybe missed punches. I don't know.
I like that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that one was sweet.
You're going to see Lomachenko doing that next year, and everyone's going to be like, who's laughing now? Josh Fabia.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Jeez. All right, so that sounds like a really normal experience to have. Yeah,
and as goofy as it is, I will say too, though. I mean, Diego's like the nicest guy in the world.
Uh-huh.
He's just always been a bit of a like if it's conventional, he almost doesn't want to do it. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's always sort of looking for an edge by thinking outside the box, and he's a real creative person, and I think it's probably helped him a lot.
Yeah.
But I think right there with Josh Fabia is where you need someone on the outside, an objective
Yeah.
person, third person POV to kind of step in and be like, Diego, I have your best interests at heart, and that's no good. And actually, here's a bit of an unverified story. I'm not going to say if this happened or didn't happen. I'll just say
Sure.
that I've heard this story
Okay.
that Fabia was brought in to a practice with Coach Winklejohn to see what he was about.
Mm-hmm.
And he was trying to show one of his moves to avoid a jab. And so we told Coach Wink to jab him in the face. And he's expecting, maybe a 30% jab, and he's going to show this bullshit, like swipe your arm around it,
Yeah.
Krav Maga style, right? And word on the street is Coach Wink goes ahead and feeds him a nice hard jab right in the mouth, and Josh Fabia walks out of the gym, and he and Diego never returned.
Mm.
But that's just the rumor mill.
I mean, it sounds real to me. I mean, why, as a
Yeah, it
responsible
does.
coach, why wouldn't you do that? I mean,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you gotta
exactly. And
call
and
someone's
that's
bluff.
like what I'm saying. That kind of speaks to that third person stepping in and saying like, "Hey, Diego, outside the box thinking. It's awesome. It's helped you be in this sport for so long, but at a certain level, conformity isn't just conformity. It's kind of reality. And the reality is these techniques they're not what's going to work at a high level of mixed martial arts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of things working at a high level, like overall, like I don't know, I don't have as specific a read on Jackson as a camp as some of my colleagues do. I think people have pretty strong opinions about the camp, especially because the top fighters have become less successful. There have been less top fighters training at the gym. So people are quick to point out, the deficits in the training systems or whatever. I think something you can definitely say is the grappling is always strong from Jackson Wink guys. I don't know if that's because of that coach you were talking about. You said Harry St. Ledger.
Yes.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah, and everyone always looks really good in the ground. Like even Diego Sanchez, who's probably not been training his best for how many years, and he's been in this game a really long time. He's always a
Yeah.
competent grappler. You can't just completely cheese out and hope to win against him. You have to have some semblance of a game going. Yeah, did you notice anything where you're like, oh, I think this could be improved, or I'm not sure about that, like that you could see leading to some weird development or fighters, or you're just trying to soak up as much knowledge as possible when you were there?
Yeah, a bit of both for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a high level of grappling, absolutely, and that's partly due to Coach Greg Jackson, and he's got a lot of like ground protocols and systems that he likes to follow on the ground. And then a big benefit as well is they've got Gracie Baja in a I don't want to say an affiliate gym, but
Mm-hmm.
there's an affiliation between Jackson Wink and Gracie Baja, and
Gotcha.
I was lucky enough to have John take me over there with he and Christian and get to do some training at that gym. And they've got a coach there. He's a former world champion, two of them actually. They've got Tusa and Barata,
Mm-hmm.
which are two real high level grapplers, and those guys are constantly at Jackson Wink working with John or Holly or all these high level
Nice.
guys. And so it is definitely a lot of Coach Jackson and a lot of Coach Tusa and Coach Barata,
Mm-hmm.
and then a lot of Coach Harry as well, like Landon, Cowboy, Dodson. Those guys will work with Harry as well. And then on the striking half, I think you do see some of the higher level guys are coming to the ends of their career. They have a few left in them for sure, but they're not 25 years old like they used to be, whether that's Holly or Diego or Carlos. But I think what it is too is they've kind of got a very not unique striking style, but I guess like they have a clear style. And
Right.
if you watch someone like Christian Edwards, who's the he's the next big guy out of
Mm-hmm.
Jackson Wink. He's the John Jones prodigy. He's 3-0 in Bellator now. He's got two knockouts and a dominant decision. He's shown skills on skills on the feet, skills on the ground. If you watch him fight, though, he's got this harassment of your legs every time you step into range. He's
Sure.
constantly throwing those John Jones stomp kicks, right? The
Mm-hmm.
oblique kicks and the linear kicks to the thighs, and you see it work really well for him. He has stuff that plays off of it. I have a breakdown of one of his fights on my channel, and you'll see him harass the legs with some distracts and oblique kicks, and then he goes high and he lands a front kick to the face, like Anderson Silva. And
Right.
so there's just people who are going to play into that style well. Christian's like a tall, rangy striker, right? He's 6'4". He's got 80-inch reach, and you see that. And physically, that's similar to John Jones,
Mm-hmm.
right? John's 6'4", 85-inch reach, and so you see these guys with a certain build and a certain style do well at the gym, and then I think there's some people who that style might not ever be the best for them.
Sure.
Like there's some guys who are going to be uh, maybe a more of a traditional Thai style, not really throwing the distract kicks and all of that. But again, that's just style, and I think also, what comes up goes down, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Jackson Wink is on a bit of a what would you call it, they're in a bit of a valley per se,
Yeah.
like they had peaked and they're coming down a little bit. They were the top gym in the sport, and now it looks like maybe that's City Kickboxing or AKA. But I think in time the level will even out. It's just right now they're almost between generations a little bit.
Sure. Sure.
And so as the next guys come along, the Patchy Mixes, the Christian Edwards, the Rodney Keelohis, they've got a lot of guys coming out of that gym who
That's
are real
great.
talented. It's just right now they're a bit in between, I feel.
Mm-hmm. It almost seems like they have a couple different systems, and this is what you're describing to me, so I'm paraphrasing a bit. They have a couple systems that they've seen work at a pretty high level. They just need certain types of guys that can fit that mold, and if you're not that guy or that girl, it probably won't work out for you. I feel like they might not be super adaptable for different people, but you can probably still become a world class fighter while you're there. Something I was wondering about while you're explaining that is I know they have Mike Winklejohn's like the head of the striking program, I guess, but they also have Brandon Gibson, who's more maybe a specific technique coach. So just from what I've seen, more from Coach Gibson, I see his pad work a lot, and what I'm seeing with the pad work is him teaching like specific types of combinations, like sequences of strikes and clever setups to land certain things, but less so like an overall long-term approach to a fight, like more like from situation to situation, here's like a thing you can do to land this, or and that's kind of what you see with Lando sometimes, where he has like
Yeah,
his
yeah.
default mode of fighting, and then he'll like, okay, time to do something, and he'll throw something interesting, he'll give you a different look. Or is that kind of an interplay between the two of them, where Mike Winklejohn might be more responsible for long-term programming, like the John Jones and Christian Edwards,
I
throwing
think
certain
I
types of
think
kicks to give that look and then capitalizing later. Go ahead.
yeah, I think really a big part of it as well is like somebody like Christian Edwards. He got to the gym just a little bit after me, and he's actually from maybe an hour and a half away from me in Yukon,
Hmm.
Oklahoma. But when Christian got to the gym, he was his first sparring day at the gym. The dude's beating up guys who were in the UFC or are in the UFC. Like
Hmm.
he didn't show up at the gym an undeveloped prospect. He showed up with real skills and talent. And so what it was is when you get a guy who's got a good fundamental base of boxing, footwork, jujitsu, a bit of wrestling, and then you take him and then you're like, hey, when you're in this scenario, this works too, and you just start adding little tools onto his
Gotcha.
toolkit, and he's
Gotcha.
already sort of got the fundamental parts. So that I think is a much better recipe for success than like
Hmm.
if you've never done a day of striking or a day of jujitsu, then going to that gym, uh, it, it's not going to be bad for you, but
Hmm.
I don't know that you're going to get like the fundamental breakdown of basic techniques. That they
Gotcha.
almost expect you to have like a competent ability to jab, to move your feet, to do all these things, and then they're adding in little concepts, if that makes more sense.
Uh huh. Yeah, that checks out to me. And it does. I feel like the top Jackson Wing fighters, they've always had really interesting parts of their game and cool things that they do. And just always like, broader skill areas or maybe some like strategic things or just,
Yeah, and
sustainability
I
with their
think
style.
not
That's
to
what lets them down.
I think too what Greg Jackson has in a lot of the guys who have invested a lot of time with him is he he's got like some interesting ideas about like the psychology of the sport.
Okay.
And I think that you you see some guys from that gym who Carlos Condit, Diego Sanchez, even John Jones in this Dominic Reyes fight, where it's like John Jones arguably loses the first 3 rounds of the Reyes fight,
Mm-hmm.
but but Jesus Christ, I mean the guy never stops
Yeah, it was
walking
crazy.
Dominic Reyes down. I mean, like Chael Sonnen put it, it's like this will to win in John Jones that's almost insurmountable. And I think a lot of that comes from Greg's sort of psychological approach. Like I know that he used to
Interesting.
take those guys out to this hill called the Hill of Tears, or sand dunes even, and he makes these guys carry each other up a sand dune, countless times, and breaking guys, And when you watch prime Diego Sanchez, when you watch the Nick Diaz fight, you see a guy who's technically skilled for sure on the ground, but almost even more than that is just this like tenacity and a constant hunting of the opponent, like just relentlessness. And I think that carried guys like Carlos Condit,
Mm-hmm.
Diego Sanchez, even John Jones now, like in fights where the skill level is matched. It's almost like that's how they've set themselves apart for their career, is
Yeah.
with tenacity and toughness. Like when you watch Carlos Condit versus Robbie Lawler, I mean, my body starts to hurt watching that fight, and I'm not even the one getting hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess what I'm seeing now, and this makes sense for a lot of camps. It's just the training is super intense. Hill of Tears, something like that. That sounds pretty soul breaking. So the people that survive and stick around with the camp and go on to represent them at a high level, they must be obviously inherently pretty tough and have great capacity to improve their conditioning, and they're that kind of athlete where they can be attrition based and pressure and all that jazz. So it makes sense, who comes out. It's always interesting to me to see like how long term trends go for camps like that, which makes me, go on to my next question. When did you think it was time for you to leave? Like when did you start thinking about a move? And then what are the immediate differences between the camps now that you're at City Kickboxing?
So I'm not at City Kickboxing full time. I
Gotcha.
just have gone up there for several weeks at a time. So what had happened was in Albuquerque, there's a fighter who came to Jackson Wink. He'd been coming there for a while, and that's actually who I'm living with now. It's
Okay.
Brogan Anderson. He's the number one ranked middleweight here in like the Australasia region.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Real good fighter, and he came and he saw a lot of the stuff I was doing, and again, like kind of like going back to what I said earlier. So I was a strong grappler, maybe even a strong wrestler when I got there, but I didn't really have a lot of technical ability striking wise.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I had been taught like a lot of cool tricks, a lot of cool setups, I never really had a coach stop me and just be like, "Hey man, like you suck. Like your footwork is atrocious, your technique is pitiful. Like there are things we have to fix before we worry about how to set up this head kick or that. It's like you can't even throw a jab properly, so we're not even going to worry about that stuff." And Brogan was that person who was really just like honest,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, like that is horrible, and anybody who tells you otherwise is doing a detriment to your career. And I appreciated that honesty, and I was willing to listen to him, and he showed me a lot of stuff, and he ran actually my fight camp for my Zach Long fight, my
Mm-hmm.
third professional fight, and far and away my best performance in martial arts. Everything we worked on the pads, everything we worked in the wrestling on the ground, like I remember I showed Brogan a video of this guy fighting, and Brogan was like, "Okay, I think we take him down. I think we ride him with one leg on the cage, punch him a little bit, and then take his back." And if you watch the fight, everything we worked just plays out exactly like that. We knew he was going to double jab and come forward, so Brogan was making me work, checking the jab and countering with the low kick. And if you watch, I come out and he steps into range and I immediately land this low kick.
Mm-hmm.
Then when we clinch, you see us have a bit of a battle on the cage, and Brogan's in my corner, and I hear him just tell me, like, frame the shoulder, get your head in there, circle him off. And I'm just like, frame the shoulder, get my head, circle him. And it's just, all of it just works exactly like we trained. And I just come out, put in a single leg hook against the fence, pull him into both hooks, punch him, and just take his neck, and we go home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, after that, I was just like, everything. He ran my nutrition, my strength and conditioning, all of my training, taught me how to do the weight cut properly, taught me how to do everything, handled like just the psychology of getting ready to fight backstage, taught me some tricks, taught me how to warm up properly. And that's when I was just like, okay, I need this level of attention 24/7. If I'm going to be a world champion in this sport, I can't be a guy who's just hanging out in the gym and working hard on his own.
Yeah.
I don't know enough to coach myself to fight at a high level, because that would be, you'd have to already be a high level fighter to be able to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's from New Zealand. He lives down here on the South Island in Dunedin. He's a head coach at a gym out here, and he was splitting time between New Zealand and Jackson Wink.
Gotcha.
And then after he left, he runs my camp. Then he comes back home, and he started doing some time at a City Kickboxing as well. And he comes, no, he didn't. He does start. He does some time at City Kickboxing as well. And at this point, I was pretty set on coming out here to train with him. And but I had another fight scheduled, and this fight is just a month after my last one, which is a bit of a too quick of a turnaround. It was something like 28 days, a little too fast after doing a weight cut and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, like I'm healthy and I'm ready. And I felt a little bit sluggish during the training camp for this one, just because, I was doing back-to-back training camps, not getting my body time to rest or anything. Just got to work hard. The day after my fight, we're already right back into full training for my next fight. And Brogan has to go home. And so I'm kind of running this one on my own again. And I just go out there, and just like almost a lack of structure, a lack of focus a little bit. Like, I was working hard, but I didn't really have that person guiding me and making sure I was working smart as well, doing not just the hard things, but yeah, exactly. And so I go into this fight, and I just don't really show what I want to show. And it's a short fight, and I'm doing fine for 28 seconds, and then I eat a right hand on the chin, and it's just the end of the fight. You're just waking up backstage like, oh, what happened? And after that fight, it was just like, okay, like, this is the consequence of doing my own thing. If I want to just be my own head coach, then this is what I can expect for the rest of my career. So after that fight, I made the commitment, and I got my visa for 1 year out here in New Zealand, and I came out here and did some time at City Kickboxing, went back home, got my stuff, and then came out here full time.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm living out here in Dunedin, and we split time between Team Hammerhead MMA down here on the South Island and flying up and doing weeks at a time at City Kickboxing in Auckland.
Gotcha. And when you're up at City Kickboxing, is it more about the training partners? You working with those coaches directly like you do with Brogan?
So I'm not in with any of those coaches at the same level as I am with Brogan, right? Like, he's my head coach, and so it's just like every training session he's there. He's a training partner and a coach, so it's real close, real tight knit. But while I'm up there, it's just like getting to learn from someone like Eugene Behrman, the coach up there, and some of the training partners up there as well. It's just it's like you go up there, you get to learn from those guys. They drill a lot too. They don't just go live all the time. Yeah, 2 hours in the morning, and you're drilling the whole time, excluding maybe once or two times a week where you go live in the morning. And so you just get to go up there, see what they're working on, learn some stuff, and then we take it back home, and we spend, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long, like, kind of making it our own and building it into our game. And it's just been a real enjoyable process and a lot of learning. And when I'm up there and I'm sparring, those motherfuckers can kickbox
Mm-hmm.
so much better than we do in America. I mean, seriously, the guys out here, the understanding of footwork, striking, distance, range, all these things, just the technical aspects of throwing punches. They've just they've been doing it for longer. Like
Right.
New Zealand, it's real close to Asia, which China, Thailand, all these places are huge in kickboxing and Muay Thai.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's where kickboxing comes from, right? Like kickboxing, Muay Thai, all these sports. And then you look at America, and where our kickboxing comes from is that karate style. They're
Right.
wearing the pants and there are no leg kicks. And so while that opens the door for some interesting stuff, like there's a development of like hook kicks and stuff that you won't see as much in traditional kickboxing or Muay Thai as you will in this kind of like American karate style of kickboxing. While that stuff's interesting and there's stuff you can learn from that, I mean, there's also just an absence of, fundamental things in striking
Yeah.
like leg kicks and stuff like that. And so, and the extended clinches and all of that. And so I think, with Americans' focus maybe being a little bit more on boxing and wrestling, and then having that karate style of kickboxing. And then out here, it's like they've just been doing this real kickboxing, this real Muay Thai for a much longer time than we have. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
they're a little bit ahead of the curve than we are. And in time, obviously, especially with the spread of information now, it'll even out.
Yeah.
But right now, I think they do have a little bit of an edge, and I think you see that when you see someone like Max Holloway, who's such a high level striker, and no one's figuring him out on the feet, right? Like Jose Aldo's getting beat up by him, and Jose might be one of the best strikers we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have Volkanovski, who was almost just like a cage clincher, a bit of a wrestler with forward pressure, sort of, not a guy who had shown the absolute highest level of striking yet. And then he goes out there and he puts on like a master class like
Right.
that against Max. And you see what Israel's doing, and that guy Brad Riddell. I don't know if you've watched him. He's only 2 fights into his UFC career, but I mean he might be the best striker in the lightweight division, or Dan Hooker as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a bit of a gap. They have a bit of a higher level understanding of the striking right now than we do in America.
Gotcha. So it sounds like between these two camps, it's just been a lot of strict skill development, just upping your competency in these areas, which makes sense for your early career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been the huge focus, and obviously lots of live work. Like I'm in great shape. I am always working hard, but the huge focus has just been, like you said, just competency in these areas. Like I got to know the striking game at the same level at least as I know the grappling game. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously my grappling's improving all the time too, but it's like uh, I felt like I've known enough to be able to decide what I like, what I don't like in the grappling, and figure a little bit stuff out on my own. But in the striking, it's like I've been so new to it that I don't know what's bullshit and what isn't, if
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
For sure.
Like honestly, it's just the level of understanding of like the building blocks and the concepts of striking, and that's what I'm really focusing on.
Mm-hmm. So you have an analytical mind. You have your YouTube channel where you do fight breakdowns. You actually broke down your own fight. Was it the Zach Long fight that you broke down?
That was
Yeah,
the Zach Long
yeah.
fight.
I recommend people check that. It's very insightful. I watched like 30 seconds into it. I was already like, oh, I'm learning things here. So that's nice. And you're also correcting your own mistakes as they were happening, which is pretty cool. So I assume you look at this sport in a big picture sense where you're planning long term and trying to figure out like what you're going to be like in the future as a fighter as you're upping these areas. And actually the way that we were introduced sort of was you were in on that thread. I believe it was the thread of my first time I was asking for listener questions, and my listener Aiden, who's an analyst himself, I would say, asked about how Chad Mendes finishes the double on a different side. Like his head is on the right side of the hip, and usually you push to that side with your head, and he's finishing towards the head side, which is contrary to what a lot of wrestling coaches teach you. And we're talking about it, and you pipe in, you're saying, oh, like it helps if you can, use this knee tap finish where you're on the hip on one side and collapsing the leg on the other side. I'm like, oh, this guy knows a lot of stuff. I have a lot to learn here. So I'm always gravitating towards people who know stuff that I don't, especially in an area where, like, I'm supposedly an expert. Like, I still don't know a ton of stuff. So it's really cool to pick things up. So I guess my question for you is just your take on this whole wrestling for MMA concept. And I'm sure it's changed for you. So when you were first starting out, thinking about, okay, in an MMA fight now where it's not, I can't just get my hands on somebody and take them down. What was your initial, approach or ideas when it came to, enforcing your wrestling in fights, and how has that developed? How's that evolved since then?
It's a good question. What really changes is you come from wrestling where the way you get into takedowns is with setups, hand fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're coming out and both of you guys are kind of having this mutual agreement to meet in the middle and wrestle.
Right.
And if a guy just backs up a whole match in international style, he loses a point for a push out every time he steps out of bounds. And in folk style and in international, you'll get hit with the shot clock, or in folk
Mm-hmm.
style, you'll get called for stalling, and or fleeing the mat, whatever. And so probably the biggest difference in MMA is those two things. So you come into MMA and no one's bent over anymore. Everyone's standing up straight. So immediately the setups change. It's no more pulling the head down and they lift their head and you shoot your double. That a lot of that stuff's out. The concept's still there, but the exact technique of it just can't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've lost this mutual agreement to engage each other. And so it's really like the best anti-wrestling is footwork, just constantly moving away, circling out, not getting caught in that wrestling range. And so do I still have? Yeah, there we go.
Yep, you're good.
You go from going your whole life where you're meeting in the middle and you're all about hand fighting and they're coming forward and you're coming forward and there's this like exchange of energy. And then you come into MMA and it's like now you don't just have to worry about all the techniques. You don't just have to worry about them punching and kicking you. You also have to worry about forcing them to engage, which is where, like cage cutting and that kind of stuff comes into play. But so the biggest difference really and the biggest adaptations I had to make was um, if you come into MMA and you come from wrestling and you try and wrestle like you wrestled in wrestling, you're going to gas out really, really quick because it's different. Strikes are
Mm-hmm.
coming at you. You don't, the setups are not the same. So you're taking shots that aren't set up. And when you don't set up a shot, you're going to deal with, deeper layers of defense. A guy's more prepared because he's not out of position from your setup. And so you're constantly having to use more energy to, reshoot and scramble out of these front headlocks and stuff that guys are putting you in because, again, you're not setting up your shots good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so really what it's about is like, I think there's three big setups for shots in MMA. And there's more, but to just kind of an idea, like three big ones. And it's you can punch somebody and make them bring their hands up in defense
Yeah.
to open up their hips, and then you can shoot. You can corral somebody against the cage and square their hips up on the fence and then shoot. Or you can convince somebody to punch at your face and then shoot off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are sort of the three biggest methods you're going to get in on someone's hips. Make them punch you, and now they're committing to kind of that stepping into range. They're engaging with you. You can or you can punch and get them to cover, and now they're moving away a line of defense. Their hands and the first line of defense, the head, is already removed from the upright posture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that third one, you can put them on the fence, and now they can't back up, and so you can shoot in on their hips a little bit easier. And I think those are like the three biggest adaptations that have to be made when you're so used to doing everything from,
Uh-huh.
a 2-on-1 or all these different setups.
I'm sure it depends, per opponent and training partner and stuff like that. But in general, uh, I'll ask this in two separate questions, or you can put them together if you want. But which striking style? So either pressuring someone and cutting them off to the cage, or playing a little bit more outside and encouraging them to come forward so you can counter, or you know offensively just kind of creating these looks where you can get your entries. What works best for you as a striker? So what feels most natural just with the setup?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think um, for me, it's not really like a heavy commitment to forward pressure and cage cutting, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not really a heavy commitment to, you know, constantly using my head as bait and trying to entice people so I can counter. I think probably for me, my favorite is just sort of like harassing someone with, feints or just well, actually I'll put it like this. I like to either punch and get the hands up and then immediately shoot, or I punch to draw out your counter and then shoot.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not really committed to doing that while moving forward or moving backwards. I'm pretty happy to do that on whether it's a reactive duck off your forward pressure and a punch, or it's just even if you're backing up, if I feel like I can get your hands in the out of position, I feel pretty comfortable taking even an extra long shot.
Mm-hmm. So then, what's your highest percentage striking setup? Like which strike or combination or situation usually gives you the best entry in your experience?
I think the best entry, and I think you see this in Amanda Nunes versus, gosh, who'd she fight? That girl who had no business grappling with
Jermaine
anybody.
Durandamy.
Jermaine Durandamy. So if you watch that fight, you see almost every takedown Nunes gets comes off Nunes jabs, and it
Mm-hmm.
draws out Jermaine's jab. And that's like a common concept, like jabbing with the jabber. Like you've
Right.
seen, I forget his name. The guy gives Muhammad Ali trouble by just constantly catching the jab and jabbing right back because jabbers, their right hands are often out of position. Blah blah blah. We get in that, but either way, so you jab, somebody jabs back, and with the jab, they're kind of stepping forward, and they're bringing their hand far away from their body, and it kind of gives you an easy line to just outside slip, change levels, and come right into a double leg or a head outside single.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the highest percentage setup you're gonna find.
And I've seen that you like the head outside single. It's funny that you mentioned the jabbing with the jabber setup for your single leg or your head outside shot because when I think I watched that Zach Long fight first. You ran the pipe on the single, and the person you were fighting, Zach Long, he goes hands and knees and turns his back and goes to base up, and then you take his back, and that's kind of how the fight ends. And I was like, this is shades of Juicy A Formiga right here. That's total Formiga moves, and I don't know if Formiga, specifically, likes to run the pipe because it opens up the back when people try to scramble or what. But I don't know, it just really reminded me of it. And I've written a few articles about his, takedown entry and clinch entry game, and that's something he really likes is to jab with people because he's such a competent, he's kind of a master of linear range. He can get in and out with his jabbing really well and parry it and draw you forward with your jabbing and time you and get to his singles and doubles that way. So kind of, if I had to match you up with a fighter right now, I might even say Formiga is a good look, um, which is probably a great compliment to hear. I assume.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I was gonna say that.
Yeah. So as a wrestler, what were your highest percentage moves, and are you finding that they're still there in MMA?
So, my highest percentage takedown by far in wrestling, far and away, and it was something Coach Mike Ryan, my high school coach, my senior year showed us, and it was so I'm coming out and I'm a left-handed wrestler, which in wrestling, right, means that my left foot is forward
Mm-hmm.
because in wrestling typically guys put their dominant hand
Mm-hmm.
forward, and
Are
and if
you
I'm
right-handed?
right-handed,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
but I knew
convenient.
that I was going to yeah, and I knew that I was going to fight orthodox, so I knew I had to learn how to wrestle from a left-footed stance.
Mm-hmm.
And so my favorite setup was coming out and slapping like a right collar tie, a right club on the back of the head. And often guys bring that side. So if I slap a right collar tie, that's their left side.
Yeah.
So often guys they do something to address my arm, right? Their left hand is going to do something, whether that's pummeling back inside or coming in for like a an elbow drag or trying to move to a 2-on-1. There's a reaction of their left hand. The left hand kind of raises to address this grip, and that brings the hand and the elbow away from their body. And so I like to slap the right collar tie
Mm-hmm.
and then just kind of allow like the inside of my forearm to sort of comb my hair as I like duck underneath it. You
Gotcha.
know what I mean? Kind of
Mm-hmm.
like I slap the collar tie and then I open my elbow, and that sort of raises their arm even more if they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to address that grip. and then I duck underneath it right into a head outside single.
Gotcha.
And that's still my highest percentage shot in wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And now the struggle there would be, how do I apply that to MMA? And so far I've not really found a for sure thing. Like
Right.
I think about, maybe it's like throwing the right straight and then sort of ducking underneath it. And, tons of guys do that, like shifting in under the right hand. That's like the famous Fedor takedown. But
Yeah, yeah.
so far I've not really developed a strong MMA version of that setup yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other highest percentage move was, and again, like I said, my first 2 years of wrestling was just me getting mugged, right? And my only experience, my favorite wrestlers were mostly guys from MMA or jiu-jitsu who were also wrestlers.
Yeah.
And one of those guys, who we all know, is Ben Askren.
Mm-hmm.
And what Ben Askren did was bring in like an era of scrambling and funk wrestling, as they call it. And that main move was his funk roll in folk style wrestling. And so I got real competent at that early, because I was just constantly getting double leg, getting single leg, all these things. So oftentimes I would find myself in competitive matches with much better wrestlers,
Mm-hmm.
just due to having, if you're not experienced with someone who's funk wrestling and scrambling and funk rolling, especially, it's like you're sort of going to be lost. Like, you're not just going to learn how to stop that move in the middle of a match. And there's a lot of guys who don't do stuff like that. A lot of fundamental wrestlers who don't have unorthodox moves.
Yeah.
And so I found a lot of success with getting double legged and funk rolling and coming out the back and scoring my own points.
Yeah, you might like. Someone was asking me the other day, like, "Oh, what's a match, or what's not a match? What's a fight with a lot of funk in it?" Which is interesting because people go to call it funk because that's a popular term, because that's what Askren was doing. But the funk roll is kind of when you're diving on the leg pass,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
transition
exactly.
out of the takedown. But
Exactly.
really, it's all just leg passing, which is probably stuff you were learning in jiu-jitsu anyway. So
Exactly. And that's why it all tied in so well. That's why I could do it. Yeah.
Yeah, but a couple fights that come to mind. Uriah Faber versus Dominic Cruz, their last fight, the third one. There's a couple cool funk leg passing exchanges, but really any fight on any card, you're gonna see leg passing because it's just grappling.
Yeah.
So it all translates, which is cool. But yeah, I always hesitate, when I think about guys who don't have the strongest game from neutral, standing as wrestlers, but they're great mat wrestlers, and they just kind of shoot themselves onto a leg and work it out from there, which was totally me as well. I didn't start to figure out like a polished way to get the shots that I can finish clean without having to like battle for my life to get 2 points until like a few months ago. Not maybe like a little longer than that, maybe like a year ago, but like over 10 years after my first time learning wrestling, I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably work that out. So it's like, you think people at a high level as wrestlers are gonna have like a full system and like prioritize efficiency and all that, but it's just not true. So it's like people give me a little slack when give me a little flack when I criticize someone like Khabib or Ben Askren, which is two very different sides of the spectrum, but guys who maybe their neutral attacks aren't as clean as they could be, and there are some issues there, but they they get to the mat and then it's fine because they're great mat wrestlers. But I feel like having a system and having ways to get clean attacks and clean finishes in MMA, like you said in the beginning, it's so much more important than it is in wrestling, because if you wrestle like you're gonna wrestle in wrestling, it's gonna gas you out because you're just not dealing with the same thing, and the other person doesn't have to engage you. They can just defend, defend and make you tired. So that's kind of what I'm stressing here with this whole podcast series, with like all my articles, is like it's gonna be important as the level of the sport gets higher that people have set plans for how they're going to get into these situations. If they're going to wrestle, like they need to know how they're going to wrestle beforehand. And I think a lot of high level wrestlers come into fights saying, I already know how to wrestle. I'm just going to learn how to fight, and then I'll go fight, and then in the fight I'll see the times that I can wrestle, and that's fine.
Well, I think a great example of that is if you watch Phil Davis.
Mm-hmm.
The guy is such a stud wrestler, right? We all know that. Penn State, right? Tons of accolades, but you watch some of his fights, and it's like his striking style is sort of this outside game, and he's throwing these long kicks and stuff. And it like, especially if you watch the Rumble fight, it's like you can see so clearly how none of the striking ever feeds into the wrestling. And obviously he's in Bellator now. He's doing just fine because,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be a pretty high level guy with how good he is, even with bad setups. He's probably going to take you down unless
Right.
you're, one of the top fighters in the world. But you saw at the highest level, Phil Davis could not beat these guys. He couldn't set up his shots on Machida as well as he wanted to. He couldn't set up his shots on Rumble, and he had to leave, and he had to go fight lower competition in Bellator, where he could, maybe get away with it more. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, get your money, take care of your family, but
Mm-hmm.
I think we found out that he didn't really have the skills to beat the top three, the top five in the division.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great example of someone whose game is kind of disjointed. And I bet if I go and I watch, old Phil Davis wrestling footage, I'll be like, oh, here's something he could do. And I feel like I could start figuring it out. So do you think maybe it's a symptom of, the way coaching is structured in MMA? Because you went out and you did a really smart thing and you found somebody who's looking out for you and building your game and giving you set instructions and here's what we're going to do in response to this and here's how we're going to get to this thing. I feel like this is pessimistic, but I feel like the majority of fighters don't do that. In your experience, is there that disconnect in the structure and game planning and like long term planning?
Yeah, I absolutely think that. I think when you see most people who sign up to be a cage fighter,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to find the most long-term intelligence type of guys. Like, here's the thing, too. Like a reality of the sport is that at the end of the day, we're all going to have brain damage, and that's
Right.
a decided thing. You will absolutely have brain damage. The question is how much and how much will it affect you.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think there are a lot of guys in the sport who are scared by the idea of like some of those long-term thoughts, like what are you going to do when your career ends? What are you going to do in the brain dead? What are you going to do? Blah blah blah. And so there's almost like a bit of like just kind of like avoidance,
Uh
like
huh.
guys just sort of stay away from these long-term thoughts and just kind of focus on the now because it's maybe more comfortable. And I also think that the sport is so young that there's a lot of involvement to be had,
Uh
not
huh.
just in the way people fight, but in the way people coach as well. Like we're kind of just now in the first generation of coaches who were competent in multiple disciplines as fighters, with like the Mike Browns coaching and the Eves Edwards coaching. And you're starting to see guys who you don't just have like a boxing coach and a jiu-jitsu coach. We're kind of in the era now of like a lot of coaches that are like at a black belt level and were good kickboxers, like Eugene Behrman and these
Mm-hmm.
guys. And so I think that that's just the evolution of everything. Naturally, is over time it gets better and it rises. So I think right now we're sort of in the infancy still. The sport wasn't around before 1990. I think MMA, the legal term, was first used in 1995 maybe. So it's like I think there's still a long way to go with a lot of the training. And I also think that there probably are some guys who would be better off elsewhere, but to pack up and move, especially when you have a family or you've made commitments or,
For sure.
change is scary, especially when what you're putting on the line is your health and your brain. So I think a lot of guys, even though they might be better off if they went somewhere else, there's that fear of, what if they're not? And then they get knocked out and then this happens and that fear sort of holds people back from growth and development.
Gotcha. I try to be so careful with criticisms I offer, and I usually just try to write about fighters who are doing things well, because you never know what's going on with somebody, like why they do the things that they do. And you brought up a bunch of excellent points, and one that I never really thought about was like a willful ignorance because they don't want to think about the long term because it's so scary. Like that didn't even cross my mind. That it's like psychologically beneficial. Like it gives them there's a reward to it to ignore it and to not plan and
Yeah,
to
yeah, and that
put it out of mind.
yeah, and that's sort of like the battle you have to play is like how much thought about these things is constructive, and then at what point does it become like an over analyzation
Mm-hmm.
of it. Like you can't sit in bed all day and just be like, man, what am I gonna do when my career's over and my brain hurts and blah blah blah. That's almost just as unhealthy as being like, oh, who cares? We'll deal with that bridge when I get there. Because you see guys who they leave the sport and then they don't really know what to do. And those guys are like Chuck Liddell. And then he comes back at 50 years old and just takes more damage. I mean, you hear the
Yikes.
guy talk, and some of it's for sure brain damage, but, brain damage is not supported, or sorry, um, the brain damage isn't helped by a career of coke and alcohol abuse,
For
like
sure.
Chuck Liddell was known for. And so you see a guy like that, and it's like, after Chuck Liddell retired, Dana White actually gave him a salary for, a fake job, just out of appreciation for what he did for the company. The only other people who got that were Matt Hughes and Forrest Griffin, as far as I'm aware. And you can sort of tell which of those people knew that something had to be next after fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt Hughes just took the money, and Chuck Liddell just took the money. But, Forrest Griffin knew that, like, he can't just retire fighting and do nothing. And so he showed up at the UFC, and he found a job that he could do instead of just taking the
Right.
money. And you see a guy like that who's now worked himself into a position at the UFC PI where he's, a coach for athletes like Ngannou, and he's influencing, the next level of martial arts. And you got to think that that's a lot healthier than, you know, being just like, oh fuck, what now?
Yeah.
Like, fuck, fighting's over. Or you see a guy like Phil Baroni, he was at Jackson Wink, and he's the nicest guy you ever meet, but you almost feel bad for him because it's like the guy does not know how to just tell himself, like, hey man, this is over. I cannot do this anymore. I have to move on. And I think what's going to help me with that is, like, I've sort of always had it in my mind that, like, I have two main objectives in this sport, and that's to be a world championship level athlete, to fight at the world championship level and win, and then to coach world championship level athletes and to coach
Nice.
fighters to win world championships. And so it's like, for me, if something happened and my career had to be over early, even, I mean, who gives a fuck, man? I'm not going anywhere from high level competition, and I see a lot of these guys who I think that they don't know they don't know what to do afterwards, and I think that's a scary spot to be in, and that's why you have to put in some effort and some thought and beforehand, so you can be
Mm-hmm.
prepared. Like Brendan Schaub's a real good example of a guy who he was still a good fighter, but he was getting beat by some of the highest level guys. And that famous speech where Joe tells him, like, I think you'd be surprised, blah blah blah. But
Uh-huh.
you look at what he did with his career, and the guy has made far and away more money in the past year than he probably did his whole fighting career.
Absolutely.
And so it's like a guy like that should be who guys in the sport now, I think, are sort of modeling themselves after. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be, you don't have to do podcasts, you don't have to do merch lines, but you do have to do something.
Yeah.
And that's not even because of money, but that's just like the human soul, like the mind, the psyche, whatever you want to call it. Like you can't just sit around and reminisce about the good old days. You're gonna drive yourself crazy, and you might park your truck in front of a train like Matt Hughes because you don't know what the fuck life is about anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think there can be. Uh, I think that's also something that we'll see in the next, who knows, 10, 20 years. But, like, sort of a platform for people who left the sport and went on to do good things to teach other people that a
Mm-hmm.
bit. If you follow that, just sort of like maybe at those UFC meetings they'll have like some speakers who have left professional sports, and kind of give these guys like a bit of a guideline. But again, the people who are competing in martial arts professionally are not Rhodes scholars typically. These aren't guys who had, every college in the nation sending them letters and they're like, no, I think I'll do cage fighting. These are guys who have, like troubled youths and broken families, and there's some pent up emotional stuff, and ideally the sport teaches them to deal with that in a healthy manner. But I think you see a lot of times in martial arts that drugs, alcohol, fame, women, all that stuff sort of drives people into the wrong type of thinking. And
For sure.
I don't know.
There's so many traps people can fall into.
Yeah.
It's a shame that there isn't more of an infrastructure to take care of people and make sure they're doing the right things. But at least you are, so that's good to hear. that you got a good head on your shoulders and things are going well. I think this is a good like natural place to leave it for now, just because I feel like we could go all day. We barely scratched the surface, so I'm expecting return visits, Jared. Uh,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
got to come back because we got a lot more to talk about. And once fights are happening again, we can do some fight breakdowns, which would be cool. But yeah, so uh, let's just leave it at that for now. Do you want to give some shout outs and plug your social media and all that jazz?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I'm just Jared McLoughlin or Jared McLoughlin MMA, and then at a YouTube channel again, it's just Jared McLoughlin MMA, so you guys can check all that stuff out, and hopefully soon enough as this stuff passes, we'll have some fights lined up, and I'll get back to doing what I do, and what I do is go in there, Ed, and I dominate martial arts contests, and despite having two losses on my record, if you go watch those fights, you'll find out I've not lost a round. I've lost fights, but I've not lost a round, and I've never even lost 10 seconds of a round. And I've been caught in fights and I've lost, but that's one moment. And if you look at any of my fights, you're looking at me dominating guys. And the guys back home, the guys in Oklahoma, they know that, and that's why the promoters in Oklahoma know if you message a professional welterweight my name, you might as well unadd them on Facebook. You might as well delete their number because you will not hear back. They will not reply, and they will not sign a contract.
Lovely. Yeah, big Formigas coming for all you guys. Big Oklahoma Formiga. Awesome. Yeah, definitely hit up Jared, and like if you guys, considering all the stories he's probably got tucked away, if you guys want to hear more stuff from Jared specifically, you can shoot me your questions and be like, oh hey, ask Jared this, and then I'll have him back and I'll do it. And that goes for our patron subscribers as well on Patreon. So if you're in the $10 tier, you could be like, oh, have Jared back on to talk about whatever. Maybe I'll give him some of your money. Probably not, but we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, this is a nice addition to the family. So welcome aboard. You're my third guest. I'm trying to have more pro fighters and pro athletes and stuff on, just because honestly I'm very insecure, and all my theories need to be validated by people who are actually in the thick of things, testing out these ideas, and I continue to have that validation, but I need more because I'm so self-conscious. So thank you for helping me out with my own personal problems there. But yeah, that's the show. Again, hit us up on Patreon. It's just patreon.com/fight site. Add us on Twitter. And yeah, just stay tuned. Definitely, subscribe on YouTube. We're putting stuff out there. But yeah, we got more coming. And thank you to Jared, and thank you to Josh Fabia for molding him into the fighter he is today. All right.
Absolutely.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
Ed, for having me. It was awesome.
Oh, no problem. No problem. All right. Peace out, world.